Despite the fact that girls are excelling in school, women continue to be paid less than their male counterparts and even held back in their careers once they enter the workforce. This is particularly pronounced in the legal profession. Joining us now for more, in the nation's capital, Kate McInturf. She's a senior researcher with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. And with us here in studio, Ritu Bhasin, people strategist and diversity specialist at Bhasin Consulting, Inc. Lori Politza, partner at Torkin Maines LLP and co-chair of the Retention of Women in Private Practice Project for the Law Society of Upper Canada. And Tamara Zdravkovic, junior associate at Anderson Wilson LLP. And it's great to have all four of you with us today. Kate, nice to have you on the line from the nation's capital. I'm going to just set up the discussion to come by reading this excerpt from last month's Economist, an edition of last month's Economist magazine, and that'll set up our conversation here. For a long time, it was said that since women had historically been underrepresented in university and work, it would take time to fill the pipeline from which senior appointments were made. But after 40 years of making up the majority of graduates in some countries, that argument is wearing thin. According to Claudia Golden, an economics professor at Harvard, the last chapter in the story of women's rise, equal pay and access to the best jobs, will not come without big structural changes. In a recent paper in the American Economic Review, Ms. Golden found that the difference between the hourly earnings of highly qualified men and their female peers grows hugely in the first 10 to 15 years of working life, largely because of a big premium in some highly paid jobs on putting in long days and being constantly on call. On the whole, men find it easier than women to work in this way. Where such jobs are common, for example in business and the law, the gender pay gap remains wide, and even short spells out of the workforce are severely penalized, meaning that motherhood can exact a heavy price. Okay, let's get into this. This is the situation in many countries. Kate, get us started. To your knowledge, is it the case in Canada?
It is absolutely the case in Canada. If you compare full-time, full-year workers, men and women, we see a 20% wage gap. So that means women working the same number of hours are making 80 cents on the male dollar. And the wage gap persists even when you compare profession to profession, age group to age group. It shrinks slightly when you correct for age and occupation, but we still see a very persistent wage gap of at least, at best, 8% among highly educated men and women in precisely the same profession.
And do we know why?
Well, we know why some of the wage gap is occurring, at least structurally. We know that women tend to work in different occupations. So that broader 20% wage gap, part of that has to do with the fact that the female-dominated professions, things like teaching, nursing, healthcare, service industry jobs, those tend to pay less than male-dominated professions like engineering, computer science, and so on. But there's still at least 50%, economists suggest in Canada, at least 50% of the gap is unexplained. That is, even if you correct by experience, by degree, by occupation, by age, you still have this part of the wage gap that, I mean, I have to say we actually know what the explanation is. I mean, economists say it's not explained, but the explanation is discrimination.
Well, let's follow up on that. Ritu, the unexplained, quote unquote, part of the explanation. What do you think's going on?
So in my view, there's two key primary reasons that women continue to lag behind in terms of compensation and actually I'd say on a whole advancement in the legal profession and across sectors. One is the pervasiveness of gender bias and blind spots that permeate Canadian organizational culture. And then secondly, it's that women continue to be evaluated based on a corporate culture that is rooted in a white, male, straight, able-bodied normative. And so when you evaluate women based on that male normative, they will not measure up. And because of that, their compensation is less and their advancement is less.
Tamara, you're practicing law how long?
Just barely even a year. I'm a 2014 call to the bar.
You're a 2014 call to the bar. Where'd you go to school?
University of Western Ontario, or Western University, I guess now.
As it is now called.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're sort of barely with a foot in the door here. What's your experience with all of what we're talking about?
Well, certainly my personal experience has actually been very good. With regards to females in this industry, I think when young lawyers project their life and what it's going to look like within 30 years or so, what they want to see is something that is sustainable. And my experience currently is sustainable.
How many lawyers at your firm?
There's 5 lawyers.
5 lawyers?
Yes.
How many women?
1. That's me.
You?
Yes. Yeah, but the partners have made a concentrated effort to integrate me into the fabric of the firm as a female lawyer. They've started to teach me about business management practices and client management, things that you don't normally see as a younger associate at some other larger firms.
Lori, how long have you been a lawyer?
28 years.
So you've more than 1 year.
Yes, more than
so
1
you've
year.
had a chance to see some of this.
Yes, I have.
How much of this is going on in Canada? This 50% unexplained.
I think it's, we know anecdotally why things happen. I agree with Ritu that there are issues that are pervasive and within the system, but I think it's also important, particularly in the legal profession, to understand that law is a business and it has a couple of different structures. Firms like Tamara's and larger firms, and both of them have their own issues that make it difficult to serve clients and be as thoughtful as they need to be about the issues that women are facing at this point.
There's a lot of reading between the lines I'm trying to do here with that answer. Ritu, you want to do some of the reading between the lines there?
Yeah, so we're talking about compensation, right? So may I focus my comments about compensation and in particular the legal profession? Mm-hmm. So what we know is and just by way of background, I'm a lawyer by training, but I now work as a leadership and diversity consultant with Canadian law firms and global law firms. I've worked with almost every single one of the large Canadian firms. And so what I can tell you is this, that the compensation gaps are not at the entry ranks. It's not at the beginning of the journey. The compensation disparities start primarily at the senior ranks when we enter into partnership, because certainly for a lot of large Canadian law firms, there's lockstep comp in terms of salary and bonus until you become a partner.
So this is how, what, 10, 15 years in that you'd be on partner, considered for partner?
You're an associate until about year 7, and then the window for partnership opens up. It's about a 7 to 10 year window depending on the size of the firm and their structure.
And that's when the disparity begins?
It's when you become a partner.
Okay.
And so it's the partner compensation where we see the disparities. And the problem within Canadian law firms, and actually global law firms, because I'd say the phenomena is prevalent with the US and global firms I work with, is that it's a systemic, so I've talked to you about the blind spots and biases and the male normative, which I can talk about in more detail later, but let's talk about compensation. There's 2 systemic challenges happening on why it is that women partners get paid less than male partners. One is that it's based on hours billed. So when you bill more hours, you get paid more, essentially. And number 2, you get credit for bringing in work. And so in the US, they call it origination credits. Similar concept here in Canada. So if you are the rainmaker in your firm, in that you attracted the big bank client or the oil and gas client or whoever into the firm, you will reap the benefits of that. Your piece of the partner pie will be larger. The problem is systemic in that most of the decision makers in Canadian corporations continue to be older men, older white men, and likeness bias permeates decision making. They want to work with older white men. And so when rainmaking occurs, it's less likely, as what we've seen traditionally, that women are going to attract in those big fancy fat files to the firms. And so because of that, the male partners continue to get the bigger piece of the pie. Okay,
let me pick this apart a bit with Tamara. You're into the whole billable hours thing right now, yes?
Yes.
How's that working out?
Okay, so just for people who may not know, the way that firms make their money is they bill their clients by the hour. And so when you're a junior associate and you come into a firm, you essentially are given a target. And that target is basically an expectation of how much the law firm expects you to work. So some firms have a target of, say, 8 or 9 hours a day, which may not seem like a lot, but if you take into account the fact that that only includes the time you actually spend on a file. That includes looking at the file, investigating, thinking about the file. If you're not thinking about the file, if you're going to the washroom or if you're going to get a coffee, or if somebody asks you how your weekend was, you can't bill for that. And you can't certainly bill for your lunch, provided that you do take an hour-long lunch. So that comes out to about 10, 12 hours for associates. And I think what we're finding more and more, and what I've heard from some of the people I know in the legal community, is that that's not something that they can sustain if they eventually want to have a family. Whereas at my firm, I feel that there's more of a commitment to a work-life balance and flexibility as to how you meet your target, which is very, very attractive to young lawyers.
Kate, let me follow up on this angle, because we've heard that older white men tend to like to hang with older white men when they do their legal work. I wonder, though, when that partner-track disparity in wages starts to kick in, are women who are partners and are sort of part of the senior management of a firm, part of the firmament, if you like, are they equally as culpable of some of this older white male behavior as the men are in your research?
I think that what we see across not just the legal profession, but all professions, is that men significantly outnumber women in senior management. But nonetheless, I mean, the research on hiring and on evaluations, personnel evaluations, demonstrates that, of course, men and women, we grow up in the same culture. We have some of the same biases in common. It's not that you get a secret detector ring when you're a woman that shows you all your own biases. And so there is some evidence that, particularly when it comes to evaluations, which are clearly linked to promotion, that men and women both tend to be a bit harder on women. And of course, we've seen Sheryl Sandberg talk about the tendency of both men and women to perceive what is leadership in a man as bossiness in a woman. But I want to get back to the point about the hours and the kind of time crunch. Sure. Because I think this is actually a broader issue. This isn't just an issue for women, it's also an issue for men. But it is experienced differently by men and women. And that's because what we've seen over the last 30 years is more and more women are going into the workforce. In 30 years, we have something like 2 million more women in the workforce now than we did in Canada 30 years ago. However, the hours that we put in at home in housework and childcare work, women are still putting in double the number of hours. And so what that's meant
we have a foreshot of you up right now, and your heads are all nodding yes. That was funny. Okay, so you're all on the same page on that one. Keep going, Kate, sorry.
And that's not anecdote. No, absolutely. I mean, I think we all feel it anecdotally. I'm sure we all did a little bit of that housework this morning on the way to something else we were juggling. But, that's Statistics Canada's time use survey, which they've conducted over the past decades. When it comes to childcare in particular, you see with housework, we've got a little more sharing amongst people in their 20s, but we're also just doing less housework, which, fair enough, we can live with the dust bunnies, we're going to work more. But childcare, you can't do less of it. I mean, somebody has to take care of the child, right? And so if you have women already putting in X number of hours doing that childcare work, which doesn't expand and contract. I mean, you can't just walk away from the child. Then there's an absolute limit in terms of how many hours they can put in at work, how many billable hours, how many weekend phone calls, all the informal socializing that helps with bringing in those big clients. It's not just preference. It's math, right? It's an absolute limit to the number of hours in the day.
Okay, let me do a little math in a different way, though. Lori, I'm going to get personal here, okay? So forgive me. 28 years ago, you were a rookie lawyer.
First-year associate.
Yeah, first-year associate, as Tamara is right now. Do you have any idea whether or not you were paid the same as the first-year male associates when you entered your law firm then?
Yes, I was.
You were?
Yes,
How do you know that?
Because our pay was shared with everyone. I mean, we shared the information.
Okay. And as you have moved up the partnership track and all of that business, do you know whether there's a wage disparity between what you make now and what the male partners make?
There is certainly some disparity, but the disparity, as Ritu has already pointed out, is largely related to the model, right? The billings, the collections, the money that comes in the door. Because the difficulty is with the current law firm structure in a large firm, because smaller firms I think are quite different animals and are structured differently. But in a large firm, 70%, for example, of a large firm is likely to be overhead. So the assistants get paid, the accountants get paid, everybody gets paid before the partners get paid, and then the partners get whatever's left. So when you're looking at the pot, that's what the partners share, and they share it in proportion to who's contributed. And contributions are valued by money in the door.
So if you're making less than your male counterparts, is it because you're having fewer billable hours?
Likely.
That's
and also, I mean, I will say that I have a personal theory, and I should tell Kate actually that I have been called bossy. So you're. Oh, see, there you go.
Haven't we all?
It'll come.
Tomorrow's working on it.
It's coming.
So, but I have a personal theory, and that is, at least in the law, that women tend to partner sort of across socioeconomic lines, and men tend to partner down. And women make choices because of the household management, childcare responsibilities, that they will be the one that will take a lesser sort of role in their employment or work part-time, and as a consequence, women then obviously aren't going to advance in the same way. Something has to give, as Kate has said, and it's most often the woman's position.
So let me, one last thing here, since we're going to get more personal here. You got kids?
No.
Is that part of the reason why you're still a lawyer 28 years later?
I think so.
Did you have to forego giving children in order to have the career you wanted?
And it was not. It was a choice that I made when I was 18. I knew I probably was too bossy for children.
Okay. That does. I mean, okay. Let's go back here. Do you? I don't know. How old are you?
I'm 27.
27. Do
Yes.
you plan to have kids someday?
Yeah, it's certainly a possibility.
Do you worry about what that may do to your potential legal career and/or earnings?
Of course, I think that the prospect of going on maternity leave, we're seeing women doing much shorter maternity leaves than before. You know, taking yourself out of the profession for a year just to take care of your child and raise it means not only within the firm, but also you may be losing contact with clients who want to keep that relationship building. However, I do feel supported, as I've said earlier, and although I do, I may want to make that choice one day, the nature of the environment that I'm in right now is sufficiently flexible, I think, that I would return, and I would feel comfortable returning, or working out some sort of a schedule wherein all of the needs were met in order for me to be able to have children. And I just also like to point out that that's also very beneficial for the firm, because if the firm is spending 5-6 years integrating me with their clients and training me to become a legal professional, it's better for them to have me return after that and not just drop out because I feel disenchanted or not supported by the environment.
Ritu, the producer of this program, Meredith Martin, just asked me in my ear, Steve, would you have asked that question of a man?
Yeah.
And it's
same
worth
thing.
exploring.
Right.
And I guess one of the reasons I felt it should be asked is because, number one, it's usually not asked of men, because they're usually not asked to sacrifice anything in their careers in order to help participate in raising their kids. That's number one. But number two, men don't seem to be getting the short end of the wage disparity stick here.
Right.
And so another reason why I felt it probably ought to be asked in this situation. What do we do about this?
So a few things. I know we're talking about compensation, but to me, compensation goes hand in hand with advancement, and I think it's really critical that we not just focus on the dollars and the cents, but we focus on opportunities for leadership advancement, which means within a law firm context, will you make it to partnerships should you so desire? And then even within the partnership, so a lot of these challenges are systemic across the board. Are you just a partner, or do you get to access being on the executive committee or management committee? So that's critical. So to me, compensation and advancement go hand in hand. This question that you posed, that in my mind I thought, blind spot, flag, does this tie back to a gender bias? Because we hear this type of question, do you want to have children, asked more of women professionals than men professionals.
Well, the fact is the women do have to have the kids. The men don't. I mean, we do have to acknowledge that.
Well, physically, yes, you need to.
Right.
Well, in a traditional context, yes, women birth the child, but not necessarily. There are a myriad of ways that men can have children without birthing the child in 2015. And so the question, in my view, is equally appropriate to be to be asking a man. In this context, I think it makes sense, but you put your finger on a very prevalent form of bias or blind spot in Canadian culture, in organizational culture, which is either called the motherhood penalty or mommy bias. And in fact, it's both a conscious bias in that leaders know, and when I say leaders, I should tell you the research says that men and women in the senior ranks within organizations have this bias. It's not just the men perpetrating the bad behavior. Women leaders do it as well because we internalize bias. That it's conscious awareness that women may step down or not reach for leadership opportunities, and so because of that, we don't promote them or mentor them or sponsor them. We're harsher on them when it comes to performance evaluations. And then there's unconscious bias. And what we know around unconscious bias, using Harvard's implicit association tests, they're called the IATs for short, out of Harvard, is that 76% of the people who have taken Harvard's IAT that looks at gender and career connect men with career and women with family. So 76% of the people have an unconscious connection with men working and women being at home. And so both the unconscious bias and the conscious bias pervades the way in which we recruit women, we give them work, we give them mentorship and sponsorship.
How much of the bias is based in fact? That in fact, more women will want to stay home with their kids than men will want to, and give up their careers temporarily than men will want to.
So I love this point because you've put your finger on another form of bias that connects back to the motherhood penalty and mommy bias. Women may choose to step out temporarily in order to raise children. Or in another area we have not yet talked about, we've been talking a lot about childcare, but a pressing issue right on the tails of childcare is elder care, because we have an aging demographic, and women, as we know, because we're already bearing the overwhelming responsibility of family care, are also now responsible for caring not only for our own ailing parents, but our spouses' ailing parents. Plus you add on the cultural layer, because right now we're talking about women and gender diversity. If you add on ethnocultural diversity, especially in Canada, some of our most populous ethnocultural immigrant communities over the last few decades, there's even increased ownership of taking care of your parents. You do not put your parents into senior citizen or elder.
In other words, the overload is profound here.
Profound. So what we know around the research is that while women may temporarily step out for family care, that women are just as desiring, if not have more desire than men, to reach the top. And that when women leave, and this for me, when I just uncovered this, and when I speak about it to audiences around how do you interrupt bias within your organization, this is a huge point, which is that when women leave organizations, be it law firms, banks, consulting firms, what have you, we often will say, she's leaving because she wants more work-life balance. That is a blind spot. What the research says is that women do not leave because of work-life balance issues. They leave because the value proposition does not exist within their current employer. In other words, if I'm going to put in the long, long hours within this organization, and at the same time I'm not getting equal opportunity, access, compensation, mentorship, sponsorship, I'm going to leave this firm, this company, and I'm going to go over there where I'll work just as hard, if not harder, and I'll get the value.
Tamara, tell me what you think needs to change in the legal profession then to make sure that you have an opportunity to be in it for the long haul if you want to be.
Right. Well, certainly I think cultures of firms need to change. I think we need to change the way that we're thinking about things. I've heard a lot of friends of mine who are at all sorts of different firms, really, and all across the country, saying that they consistently feel alienated within informal networks inside the firm. They feel invisible, and that they can't compete, just what Ritu was saying, right? And that kind of has the effect of taking a junior associate out of the running and making them disenchanted well before their career has even really taken off. Just while they're trying to build respect and credibility, they are seeing that they want to take themselves out of the running, and that's how they're feeling. So they do. And the reality is that the firm doesn't really know about it until the 2 weeks notice is in.
It's too late by then.
And it's way too late.
You're doing something called the Justicia Project, is that what it's called?
Yes, at the Law Society, in fact, Ritu was involved in it. At the Law Society, we discovered that our female lawyers were leaving practice between 2.5 and 3.5 times more often than their male counterparts of the same vintage, between 7 and 10 years of practice, which is obviously a concern. So the Law Society established the Justitia Project, which I was involved in, as was Ritu. We looked at firms, and what we wanted to know was what could help women stay in private practice, because we felt that was very important. And we looked at firms that were, at Tamara's size firms, sole firms, small practitioners, which have an entirely different set of issues than larger firms, which are more institutional in nature, to try to assist women. So we made a real effort to try to solve some of those problems in a very modest first step way. And I'm really pleased, because our project has actually been picked up by the law societies in most of the provinces across Canada.
Did you make some recommendations, and have they been picked up on?
They have. With respect to sole and small firms, because it's a business, and really you are there and you are hands-on with the client, right? It's a very much an ownership mentality. Women who are, in the event that they're going off to have a child, they need somebody they need money to keep the door open. They need to be able to pay their rent, pay their assistant, and they need to be able to take some time. So the Law Society actually provides some money for a short period of time to help them do that. We've also set up coaching to help them ramp up and ramp down from leaves. And we have a contract lawyers registry. So if they want someone to come in and actually care for their clients, which is obviously what you do, it's how you keep the doors open, that's what we can do in small firms. Larger firms have different issues, and we've tried to deal with the issues at larger firms by, in part, working at changing the culture, which is an exercise, but also helping female associates take charge of their own careers, because women are, in the main, not the best advocates for themselves. And as Tamara said, you need to ensure that that women feel comfortable with having a voice. They always say that when men and women are speaking about their compensation, women will say, "Oh, thank you so much. That's terrific," and men will say, "You haven't paid me enough." Right? So we've done model policies for the firms and guides for both the firms for business development, leadership, mentoring, career advancement, so that both from the associate's perspective, they have a template as to the things that they might do, and the firm will know better what it can do so that it doesn't lose the investment of 5 years in an associate because they've chosen to leave.
So, Kate, there seems to be a recognition that some things have to change. Based on your analysis, is this actually happening? Are law firms starting to embrace some of these newer ideas?
Well, I mean, I can't speak to law firms specifically, not in the kind of detail as some of your other guests. But I wanted to come back a little bit to the question around work and family life, because I do think that needs to change, and I do think it is changing. But I think it's important to look at the daddy side of the equation as well as the mommy side of the equation. And one of the things that gives me the most hope, frankly, around how we negotiate all of this is that if you look, for example, in Quebec and in some of the European countries that have targeted paternity leave, so that's parental leave that only fathers can take, you see a huge uptick in the number of men taking that leave. So right now, today in Canada, since Quebec introduced a parental leave that was specifically targeted to men, 3 out of 4 fathers in Quebec take time off to spend with their children, and they spend about 2.5 times as long with their children as men in the rest of Quebec, Canada. And in the rest of Canada, it's 1 in 4 men who take time off when their children are born, and on average they take about 2.5 weeks off. So what that's telling me is that men also want to renegotiate this relationship between their family life and their work life. And I think that's fundamental to seeing a shift in the corporate culture in law and in other professions that are very demanding of people's time, is that we start to see a kind of normalization of You know, mom and dad are equally sharing the work at home. They're both taking time off, and this is the new normal. And that means that the way that we look at their billable hours, our expectations of their relationships with clients is going to change, and it's going to be more of a situation where we see that this is just a fact of life, and it happens to men and women, and we don't start to, you know, remove opportunities from women before they even not just even have children, but even evince any, you know, interest in having children. I think there's a lot of kind of employers making decisions on behalf of women because they imagine that this might be what women want, that they might want a ramping down of their responsibilities because they might possibly want to have a child, to take time off, and so on.
Okay, Kate, let me ask the overarching question then, and this is really not meant to be a smart aleck question, but it's just, as a society, why should anybody care whether or not women drop out of the legal profession after year 5, 6, 7, whatever? Why is it in society's interest to make sure that this issue get resolved?
Well, I think there's both a pragmatic answer to that and there's an ethical answer to that. The ethical one is obvious, which is that men and women deserve equal treatment. Indeed, our charter guarantees that. They have a right to non-discrimination on the basis of sex. But I think the pragmatic answer is, A, as one of your guests already pointed out, it's a huge waste of money on the part of firms to invest in mentoring, in training, in developing a member of their organization and then have that person leave, and then they have to replace them. So they have to reinvest all of that time and money. And I think the other issue is the broader economic issue, which is if you look at men's employment incomes, they've been pretty much stagnant for the last 2 decades. The reason that family incomes are going up is that women are going to work. And you know, if we look at average incomes for families, they're not huge. People are not winning the lottery. And so what that means is, at a very practical level, families where there are 2 adults need those 2 adults to work. And in families where one of those adults, or indeed both of those adults, are women, they need to work. They need to work to make it. They need to work to make the rent, the mortgage, the grocery bill, never mind, you know, the hockey for the kids and all the rest of it. So I think when we talk about women making choices, we need to keep in mind that for most women, and indeed most families, this isn't a question of choice. This is a matter of necessity.
You have to do. Okay, I'm down to less than a minute here. Ritu, tell me this. Do clients care whether it's the men or the women who are doing the work in the firm, or how many women there are in the firm, or any of these issues we've been talking about?
Yes and no. So my experience working across sectors is that organizations, clients that are B2C, so business to consumer, they care more because they see the spend that women consumers have. Their clients, their consumers are increasingly women. They're from diverse communities. So because of that, internally, there's a bigger push to be inclusive, and then they push that on to their service providers, which is where the law firms are touched. But in my view, and this goes back to the question you asked Kate earlier, are the law firms actually doing anything about this? I would say I'm pretty mad at the Canadian law firms, because while they recognize the problem and we've studied it to death, very little cultural change is actually taking place in the legal profession on a whole.
Lori, can I get you on that issue, whether the clients care one way or another about this?
I'm in a direct consumer relationship with my clients because I practice family law. So my clients, when they need me, they need me. They can't wait if I'm not there.
And therefore?
And therefore, it's much more difficult in a direct client relationship not to be available to them all the time. So the firms have to work a lot harder to ensure that there is transition and coverage, and recognize that women play an extremely valuable role in the firm, and they have to continue to play that role.
Terrific. Thanks very much, everybody, for this. Kate McInturf in Ottawa, it's good to have you on the line from the nation's capital. Ritu Bhasin, Lori Politsa, Tamara Zdravkovic. Boy.
Well done. Well done.
Well, university.
Telling you.
A+.
Cannot remember the last program where I had so many hard names to say. But anyway, great to have everybody on TVO tonight. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.